Are you sick of cop shows and reality TV? Well, MungoFlix was created just for you thinkers. People that are awed by the world around them but want to find out, how does it work? Come with me, we've got 3 exciting categories, you'll love them. The first channel is Ancient Destructions. We ask questions never before asked.
Is it possible that maps from the time of the pharaohs can show Antarctica free of ice?
And then who pulverised Egypt and dumped sand over it? Second category, EU Human, the electromagnetic effects on your brain, body and the world around you. The third category, electric geology, the application of the electric universe to the Earth's sciences. Some radical conclusions follow. MungoFlix, 3 categories, $10 a year subscription. Sign up and join in the adventure. Could wild electromagnetic activity hold the key to the madness that is war and revolution? You lie strapped to a bed, 800 milliamps of electrical current pounds through your brain. Your depressive numbness is slowly replaced with elation. Miraculously, your suicidal brain is reprogrammed, but no one understands why. Electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, is still used in severely depressed patients with predictable if cloudy results. But in Royal Hobart Hospital, a new electromagnetic therapy, RTMS, uses pulsating magnets of 1.5 Tesla in strength to achieve relief from intractable depression. This spectacular new therapy changes the brain's mood and drive. But how can electromagnetism do this? Can a changing electromagnetic environment affect your everyday life? The brain's electrical nature was first measured in 1924 by the Swiss eccentric Hans Berger with his invention of the EEG machine. The brain produces microvolt discharges of incredible complexity. The whole body is a vast electromagnetic synchronized labyrinth. Even neurohormones rely on ionic connection or electrical polarity to function. In fact, the brain can be sent haywire by ionic imbalance brought about by seasonal weather change. Fred Soyka recognised the effect that electrically charged atmospheric ions had on mental states. For instance, certain areas of the world at certain times of the year experience dramatic behavioural and psychological change. The Middle Eastern wind, known as the Sharav, literally sent many people bananas. Amazingly, magistrates even allowed for the wind's ability to bring on symptoms from aggression to depression. The Sharav is literally a hotbed of excess positive ions electrically affecting people's lives. In our own Melbourne, irritable hot northerlies echo this. But this is a relatively mild departure from normality. Our own sun is a major determining factor when it comes to weather. Henrik Svensmark believes, in fact, that cosmic rays, which are positive ions, are the major driver of weather and thus should have a major influence on our minds and bodies. How does it do this? Henry Svensmark explains it this way. Our galaxy is full of high-energy cosmic rays, mainly produced from distant stars. This part of near space, the Sun's heliosphere, acts as a shield against these high-energy cosmic rays. If you have a change in solar activity from coronal mass ejections, sunspot activity or solar flares, this moderates the cosmic rays, typically from a CME, it drops 10%.
Visualize the event that happened in 2003, where you have this ejection of plasma. This is the Earth, this is the Sun, and you see these two clouds coming out here. And I think it's it's a matter of a day or two before it reaches the Earth. Then you have a drop in the cosmic rays.
What happens when a cosmic ray enters the atmosphere? Here's a simulation 16 kilometers above a city. Here we have a high energy proton entering the atmosphere, and as it does, it cascades and produces 1 billion or so secondary particles. And this is where the cosmogenic isotopes are formed, in the nuclear reactions occurring, such things as carbon-14. Changes in solar activity from whatever cause dramatically affect cosmic rays. This, in turn, affects the cloud cover on the Earth. Notice on the graph how the cosmic ray concentration closely follows the cloud cover. From coronal mass ejections, CMEs, to solar flares, the Sun influences our planet with chaotic electromagnetic stimulus. It's even postulated that these excessive electromagnetic discharges directly affect our demeanour, attitude, behaviour, and yes, sanity. The collective brain of the human race might become overstimulated. Could it then degenerate into erratic and aggressive behaviour? Can electrical chaos send us to war? An episode in Australian Aboriginal mythology supports this bizarre theory. Mungo's fire, which is widely held to represent an aurora australis gone crazy, is blamed by the tribal elders for terror and war. They despairingly lament, "Mungo's fire filled the whole space between the earth and the sky." The Kuanai of the Gippsland region would shout such words as, "Send it away, do not let it burn us up." Men went mad with fear and speared each other, fathers killing their children, husbands their wives, and brethren each other. Traditionally, we explain war as folly rooted in mankind's stupidity and greed. But Claude Schaeffer, who studied the demise of civilizations, is famously quoted as saying, "Those great crises will explain better than before the historical development of the most ancient civilization and its mechanism. And they will definitely take out of the hands of man the command of the great historical happenings we thought he possessed." Humans live and die surrounded by wildly fluctuating electromagnetic forces. Our body and brain pulse with electric currents. From deep within the bowels of the earth to the outer reaches of the cosmos, your body has to adjust to these incredible pulsating forces. In EU Human, we look at the way you're connected to other people by electricity and magnetism. In EU Human, we look at the way the electric sun interferes with every aspect of your life. Electromagnetism can even affect your sanity and send countries to war. Come with us as we study the effects of the electric universe on your very everyday life. Just how does it affect you? Come with us on the EU Human journey. Earthquakes kill more people than any other weapon of nature, and ancient earthquakes were far more destructive than ones of recent times. For instance, in 115 AD, 2,000 years ago, 250,000 people were killed in one hit alone. This was in ancient Antioch. Staggering. Now, modern science doesn't even begin to understand earthquakes, let alone their related phenomena, volcanoes and tsunamis. Let's shed some new light on these deadly aspects of nature using the electric universe model. The current academic tectonic plate theory doesn't even begin to come close to explaining so many of the related events accompanying earthquakes. There are around a dozen phenomena that need our special attention. Let's go through them one by one. Tsunamis invariably accompany earthquakes if they're by the sea. For instance, at Lisbon and Port Royal in Jamaica, very old earthquakes, the sea went well out, leaving all the fish stranded, sometimes even 2-3 kilometres, and then with renewed fury and vigour it rushes back in, taking all before it and going well inland. This phenomenon is extraordinary. What causes it, we don't know, but we're going to investigate. Now here we have a classic combination of tsunami and earthquake together around this bay. See all these smashed shells, burnt and pulverised together. A typical artefact of an earthquake. And even more up here, stretching right around this particular bay. Let's just get a close-up of these shells. See how they're absolutely mangled and burnt? What force of nature was able to exert that destructive, potent force? Just note some of this stratigraphy up here. What caused this separation of the different clay and earth layers? Note the dump of till with all the shells in it right along this ridge line. It's quite remarkable when you actually start to think about these forces. This tree burnt, buried, metamorphosized amongst the rock, bits of wood in the rock, partially petrified. What forces again of nature were powerful enough to roll, thrust, bury this wood, petrify it and burn it right along this foreshore. See this metamorphosized piece of rock, pebbles cemented together, buried amongst it the wood of this tree stretching right along the beach and under the water. And see how it's burnt, badly burnt. This has been a devastating earthquake with fiery eruptions, a mega tsunami pulverising this coast, and electrical effects that we're going to explain later. Calm, serene bay. No wind, sea everywhere, sand. Who'd have thought that 500 to 1,000 years ago this was the scene of a devastating mega tsunami and earthquake that totally changed the landscape. Where you now see sea, there were meadows. What happened? In fact, a tsunami in around 500 AD ravaged the whole of the Lebanese coastline, burying Beirut, Byblos and other cities. This was accompanied by extremely destructive earthquakes. But this was merely the last of a devastating series that have ravaged this area. Lakes and waterholes almost always either formed or destroyed whenever there's a major earthquake. In 1692 in Catania, Sicily, the whole town disappeared under the earth to be replaced by a lake. A prime example of earthquakes' deadly action. These activities are invariably accompanied by sulphurous fumes and bitumen-clouded water and outbursts. But now we come to more of the exciting facts that science has only recently discovered. The congruence of sunspot minima and earthquakes. Sunspots are upon the sun's surface, and they're the magnetic focus where solar flares and coronal mass ejections are formed. The number of sunspots moves from a maxima to a minima over a period averaging 11 years. This has been recorded since at least 1600 to the present day. Most earthquakes occur during times of sunspot minima, and the worst of all when there's no sunspots at all. For instance, 1692 in Sicily, the worst earthquake possibly of recent times, when 150,000 people were killed. And beginning 1690, no sunspots for 5 years. 1645, an equally bad period, none for 6 years. But look at the present era of the 20th century. Hardly any massive earthquakes, but look at the astounding number of sunspots. The next phenomenon is incredibly hard to explain if you use the theory of tectonic plates. This is the violent thunderstorms accompanied by horrific winds and very destructive lightning bolts. In the Sicilian earthquake of 1692, it was reported that entire buildings were destroyed by the thunderbolts themselves, while trees were uprooted and thrust into the air. And here's some curious accompanying dramas of earthquakes: war, drought and plague. These are invariably mentioned in ancient texts. For instance, Thucydides starts his Peloponnesian War drama with the plague and earthquakes in Athens. Certainly modern scientist Henry Svensmark ties weather in with sunspots and coronal mass ejections. Perhaps these are related events. We'll investigate later. Many sources talk of mountain building, mountain shifting and mountain destruction. For instance, at Port Royal in Jamaica, hills were built and destroyed in this one great earthquake. In Sicily and Calabria, hills were built only to denigrate back to the earth again, and vast tracts of land moved across the landscape. Luminescent glowing lights are seen in the skies before, during and after an earthquake. They're likened sometimes to aurora, only usually blue but sometimes multi-spectrum in effect. They're usually close to the epicenter, but have been recorded as far away as 70 miles. A typical cloud is formed above an earthquake epicenter. An example exists from the Calabrian earthquakes of 1638. On arriving by sea to St. Euphemia, a large flat cloud was seen over a lake. Where the lake was, St. Euphemia had been swallowed by the earth. Finally, in our dissection of earthquake phenomena, we come to animal sensitivity. They are curiously receptive well before an earthquake strikes to its effects. How do we explain these seemingly unrelated earthquake phenomena? Tectonic plates only handles the grating and mashing of rocks. How do we explain the electrical effects? This is where the electric universe theory comes in. If we try this paradigm and apply it to earthquakes, some surprising results come about. In the next episode, I'll be interviewing physicist Walt Thornhill. He's the boundary rider of science. He's got some amazing new insights into earthquakes. Wait for the next episode. See you then. If it starts you thinking, keep us filming by subscribing for only $10 a year. You can then immediately watch all the episodes available. Then join us in the journey and actually help us as we make new episodes every month. 150 years ago, the most powerful solar storm in recorded history hit the Earth. Richard Carrington sketched its magnitude in 1859 whilst observing the bright flashes of a solar flare on the surface of the Sun. But could this massive Carrington solar event of 1859 have had broader effects than anyone originally assumed? Let's go back to the Australian Gold Rush, 1859, and find out what happened. Imagine your posturing self-assurance as you parade on the dockside of Port Melbourne, dressed in the finest fashions the colony of Port Phillip can offer. You turn and your beautiful new bride is elegantly bubbling beside you while showing off the latest copy of High Paris Couture. Yes, my boy, you've made it. The year 1859. You came to the Victorian goldfields a pauper and struck it rich. You look across the bay to Frankston, Mount Martha, Dramana and Tubbarubba, where shortly even more goldfields will be pegged out. This was an era like no other, and rags to riches were common, with no conniving government tax collectors to strip you of your Paul Hogan fortune. Now, with ritzy wealth reflected in your grand finery, you are boarding the luxurious steam clipper Royal Charter to fast tack up Port Phillip Bay and head home to England. Doubtless, the gentry will fawn over your newfound colonial riches. This sleek iron sailing ship is a modern technical marvel. She's the fastest steam clipper in the world, and on this trip she will break the Melbourne to England record by touching down in 58 days. Built for the Australian run, she's 80 metres long, weighs 3,000 tonnes. She is carrying 388 passengers and 112 crew. But what else? This is a gold ship. She is bursting with over 70,000 ounces of gold. That's $98 million today. Also, she has 48,000 newly minted sovereigns and the personal gold wealth that was uncalculated of passengers who struck it rich on the Victorian goldfields. As you steam by Perth on September the 1st, 1859, all the passengers are delighted by an incredible phenomenon. It is the Aurora Australis, but one so bright it lights up the night as if it were day. The Captain Thomas Taylor notes he has never seen an aurora this close to the equator before. Skies all over planet Earth erupted in red, green and purple auroras so brilliant that newspapers could be read as easily as in daylight. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a brilliant aurora borealis is seen as far south as the Caribbean and Hawaii. This was the largest geomagnetic storm ever recorded, according to NASA. Telegraph systems all over Europe and North America failed. Telegraph pylons threw sparks and telegraph paper spontaneously caught fire. But this was only the first portent from the heavens. Just 2 months earlier, a massive earthquake had occurred in Erzurum, Turkey, a force 9 on the Mercalli scale. Over 16,000 people had perished. Was there a strange connection between these two events? But even stranger coincidences were to follow. The rest of the Royal Charter's journey was pure bliss. The luxury cabins were a delight, the company boisterous, and the sharing of wealth-laden future dreams enervating. As she beat down towards the English Channel, all seemed well. But when she reached the northwestern tip of Anglesey on October the 25th, the barometer was dropping. The master, Captain Thomas Taylor, was advised to put into Holyhead Harbour for shelter, but he continued on to Liverpool. During the night of October, the winds rose to hurricane force 12 at over 160 kilometres an hour in in what became known as the Royal Charter gale. Its direction changed from east to north-northeast, driving the ship towards the coast of Anglesey. At 11 p.m. she anchored, but at 1:30 on October the 26th, the port anchor chain snapped, rapidly followed by the starboard. Despite cutting the mast to reduce the drag of the wind, the Royal Charter was driven ashore with the steam engines unable to make headway against the gale. The ship initially grounded on a sandbank, but in the early morning the rising tide drove her to the rocks. Hurt against the rocks by huge waves, whipped up by winds of over 160 kilometres an hour, she quickly broke up. Most of the passengers and crew, a total of over 450 people, died. Many of them were killed by being dashed against the rocks by the waves rather than drowned. Others were drowned, weighed down by the belts of gold they were wearing around their bodies. The survivors, 21 passengers and 18 crew members, were all men, with no women or children saved. The Royal Charter storm was the worst of the entire 19th century, with a total of 133 ships sunk during the storm. The death toll was around 800. What had caused this unprecedented megastorm? I believe we can look to another event that shows us precisely where our weather comes from. In the heavens, the solar superstorm of 1859, also known as the Carrington event, was the most powerful storm in recorded history. Richard Carrington sketched its magnitude while observing the bright flashes of a solar flare on the surface of the sun. This was the same event that caused the disruption of telegraphs, the extreme glow of the aurora australis, earthquakes in Turkey, and finally the massively destructive Royal Charter megastorm. Quite probably synchrotron radiation poured down on Earth. Temple's observation came shortly thereafter, when he sketched an enormous coronal mass ejection, or CME, with its terrible body blooming out as far as the width of the sun itself, in a solar eclipse a few months later. The electromagnetic connection with the sun controls our weather, not puny mankind with his imagined impact. One more phenomenon occurred that is painfully coincidental and baffles modern science. The worldwide flu epidemic of 1859 was one of the worst ever, according to J. Duffy, causing 500,000 deaths. Could solar flares and the CME's synchrotron radiation stimulate viral growth? Now you might ask about the gold. Well, many an Anglesey resident became rich overnight, and to this day salvage divers seek to recover some of the wealth, but I'm told with no success. Whilst filming on the Jurassic Coast in England, I spoke to one of these professionals involved in the last attempt in 2005. Expert salvage diver John Ledger gave me some souvenirs from his incredible memorabilia: a few lead balls of rifle buckshot, a broken plate and some Royal Charter ship's rivets. These I have with me as I talk about this tragic tale, a sad legacy that has returned to Melbourne some 150 years later.
Want to tell you a story of a place where good folk live, where the water meets the sky, and the wind, she tells no lie.